What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. If Christian's here, you know what we're doing. We're doing a this or that, and we're going to be having some fun with this one. We're going for two quarterbacks that we have argued about for like 2 years, it feels like. Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud. Who are you drafting? And this is going to be kind of like a hybrid, rookie, dynasty, whatever you're in. They're really going back to back, so this kind of will cover it all. So we're going to be diving into it after the intro. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll catch you guys on the other side. All right, let's get into this bad boy. These two guys are really, really excited to watch these guys finally play in, I don't know, in a freaking, in a league, and we get to do this and not argue about it and go through it. Right now, when you're looking at both of these guys, Bryce Young is Dynasty ADP is going around that, middle of second round, QB 13. CJ is kind of in that second round. I've seen him slip sometimes to that third round maybe, but at quarterback 14. So like they're going back to back, and you're really kind of deciding, okay, who do I want to build this team around as probably my second quarterback in a Superflex league, and where are you comfortable with drafting these guys and moving forward? What does that look like? Now, when we talk about the college production, I'm going to throw it over to Christian. We'll talk about CJ Stroud. I know that Christian's been really high on CJ in terms of like what he can be as a prospect, and he was probably higher than most people earlier on, so I got to give him credit there. So what do we expect, and what do we see from CJ at the college level?
Yeah, so an incredibly productive dude. I think, CJ has put it well himself. I think he's a couple throws away and a couple games away. When he lost those two Michigan games, shout out Kevin. When he lost those two Michigan games, though, I think that kind of put a damper on his seasons and really removed him from the Heisman discussion. But when you kind of look at these two guys back to back, you start to say, well, CJ was kind of the more productive guy over the course of his starting career. He had a little dip in production in 2022. I think a lot of that kind of revolved around the fact that Jackson Smith-Njigba was hurt. I know that, there's jokes about Ohio State just having remarkable wide receivers. That's also true. But the way they played offense changed a little bit last year. Still threw 41 touchdowns, had 44 the year before, so 85 touchdowns over the last 2 years. An incredibly accurate dude, which I think we'll talk about what they're good at and things like that here in a second.
Yeah, I think, Bryce coming off the Heisman his sophomore year. Then this last year, we saw a dip in numbers too. You could see that in there. And I think part of that was because of his, the weapons that he maybe didn't have. It's hard to say Alabama didn't have weapons. I hear Jeff Bell's voice in the back of my head yelling at me right now saying Alabama didn't have weapons, but they struggled last year. And they really struggled with a system, that didn't really kind of fit what Bryce did. But Bryce elevated his game. And I think, he won the Heisman. When he did that, he did have the single season record for passing yards and touchdowns. He had 47 touchdowns that year. And to be honest, without him, they don't even come close to beating Georgia in the SEC title game, and then not even close to competing in that national title game with a very, very solid Georgia team. And then last year, I don't think they came close there. But as far as a prospect goes, we'll talk about what he does well on the field. But like in college, he was one of the highest, production guys there. Freshman year, he did win the title. Just Mac Jones was the starting quarterback. But we don't talk about Mac on this channel at all. So let's just move on from there. Now, what do we expect from Bryce moving forward? So, I think from a dynasty perspective, what you're looking at is, he got selected by the Panthers. The issue is with the Panthers is they don't have a first next year. So when we're trying to figure out, when these quarterbacks take that next step, it's usually when they get paired with a Jamar Chase, like Joe Burrow did. We have seen Justin Herbert kind of struggle because he doesn't have that young guy. Maybe that's with Quentin Johnson going forward. And so when they take that next step, you're like, hey, what can he be? I think from a dynasty outlook, that's something to note, right? They moved up to get him, but, they have Jonathan Mingo and this wide receiver room around him. What is that going to look like? So that's the thing. When you're looking at just the depth chart overall, Miles Sanders is there, Chuba Hubbard. You like them. You don't love them, but you do like them. And then you look at their wide receiver room, and I noticed someone on social media said, hey, they could have 5 wide receiver ones. And then someone quote tweeted and said, in the XFL. And I thought that shit was hilarious because it's kind of true. Like Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Jonathan Mingo. We're even getting a little Terrace Marshall buzz. And if people don't know, me and Christian fought over Terrace Marshall one of the first years we met each other. I was like, hey, why don't you like Terrace Marshall? And you basically said he sucks. And I was like, oh, okay, and look at you. So that, I mean, that's the thing with this room. will he be able to elevate himself, right? Hayden Hurst, Ian Thomas, like no one really stands out. I do think Thielen, if he stays healthy, is a good option. You and me both like DJ Chark. We've always kind of been a Chark guy if he can stay healthy, but there's a big if there. Now, how does Bryce moving forward as like from his perspective of scouting? I think his awareness and his out of structure playmaking will fit this roster because I do think that he can elevate those guys around him, and you're going to see that. Love his accuracy. I love all those things about him. Like he's a safe prospect. I think it's just something to know is like they're not going to be able to go get that dude next year. It's not no Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in that room. So they're going to have to really make do with what Bryce can do as elevated guys around him. The weaknesses stuff, I think the big thing is his size. You're already seeing the jokes made. And if you see these jokes getting made, just know that's because they're not creative enough to make anything else. We have actually noted timing issues with him and some rushing upsides limited from his perspective, which are two things to know, especially the rushing upside. But, we've always said Bryce is more of a QB1 late or, back end quarterback one anyway. You're getting him as your quarterback two. That's not a bad value if you're going to pair him based on the ADP with one of these other guys, Herbert, Burrow, Fields, one of those guys if you're going to start double quarterback in that area. What's your real quick opinion on Bryce?
Good player, man. And this is, we've talked about these guys for so long that I got pretty tired of it, honestly.
Yeah.
We talked about it on the podcast a lot. And, this was a conversation that we've been having for a couple of years now because we kind of saw this coming where that we would be having these discussions. But I do think one thing that gets lost in those discussions sometimes is, and something that I've been preaching now for the last 3 to 4 months is both of these guys are very good. And really, I'm not going to spoil the pick, but there are definitely scenarios where I've found myself taking both of them. So,
Yeah.
just you're looking at obviously that wide receiver room in Carolina isn't going to be the same after this year. They definitely put pieces around him as a placeholder, as a way to ensure that he doesn't get killed in his rookie year, the same way that like the Bears just kind of did with Justin Fields in his year two. The Panthers did things to kind of negate that. So
Yeah.
I think he's got a nice fantasy outlook even as a rookie this year. So.
All right, let's jump over to CJ. What can we expect from CJ?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned it when we talked about the stats. Just a pinpoint accurate quarterback, and that's one thing. We talk about Bryce's ability outside of structure. Stroud has shown he's got some ability outside of structure, but he is very much so more comfortable in the pocket. And when he is getting clean pockets and things of that nature, you're looking at a guy that can make every single throw across all 3 levels of the field. You're looking at a guy that can dice up a defense with how quick he can process things. I think that's one thing that separates these two quarterbacks from maybe even some of the ones that we've seen recently. I think both of these quarterbacks, I know this sounds a little crazy, but I think they both processed a little bit better than Trevor Lawrence did simply because of the offenses that they ran in college. I think they're more pro ready, and a lot of colleges are moving to that, but it really set up Stroud to succeed early. When you're looking at the depth chart, there's already been reports that Davis Mills thinks that he's gonna be in contention for that QB1, but Stroud already overtook him at OTAs. Where it gets a little dicey is the wide receivers in Houston are arguably worse than the ones in Carolina. And I don't know who's arguing for the Texans. You've got Robert Woods, Nico Collins, John Mechie hopefully makes a nice return. I thought he was a good receiver. I think he's a nice wide receiver too. Tank Dell, Noah Brown they signed. They drafted Xavier Hutchinson as well. They do have Dalton Schultz, which I think could be a reliable weapon and a nice little safety valve for a rookie quarterback. But one thing that, I think we didn't really factor in initially with Stroud is the new offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, comes from the Shanahan tree, comes from the Kubiak tree. And so this team is going to very much so be a run first. The running will open up the passing game. While that fits Stroud's game to a T, that is almost the perfect system for him. I also think that could limit what that upside is for 2023. So I think you're looking at maybe a slow start. I think he's going to be an efficient player in 2023 because I think that, his ability to command an offense will still be there. It's just, I think you're looking at a kind of a lower volume type of play with Stroud where he might get you a few like boom weeks, but I think you're going to comfortably get a low end QB2 from him.
Yeah, the roster scares me a lot. I mean, I think the offensive philosophy that you brought up is important, but also just those wide receivers. I know people want to be Nico Collins season out there. Like they've been wanting to be Nico Collins season for a while now. And it just worries me. Like that just overall offense kind of worries me there. But let's dive into the pick because that's really where I'm going to go with this. When you're looking at both of these guys, if I'm on the clock, I mean, people have watched me know I'm taking Bryce Young. That's pretty a consensus at this point. If you've kind of dealt the content here at the Devy Royale. But I think just from a perspective of I've seen Bryce kind of elevate his game when his weapons weren't all perfect. Like when you watched him play these last couple of years, yeah, he had Jamison Williams 2 years ago, and yes, he won the Heisman with him. But this last year, he elevated that offense with guys that just were not producing. Some of them have transferred out of that program, and he showed that he could still be an elite level quarterback with weapons that maybe weren't perfect and weren't surrounding him. Stroud has shown, hey, he produced, but he struggled even this last year with Marvin Harrison Jr., which is consensus top 5 pick. And so I think I worry about that a little bit when you looking at that. And I just like Bryce a little bit more as a prospect. And I've had him as my quarterback one for a long time. So I'm going to lean Bryce. And I think that, like you said, I think Bryce has a little bit of a higher ceiling. He could be probably a lower end quarterback one for his whole career, and we're okay with that. I think Stroud just has a lot of different outliers. Where could he end up being?
Yeah. So I'm one. I've had CJ Stroud at QB1, through the draft and even immediately post draft, and I think that these two have similar ceilings, right? I think you're correct in saying maybe Bryce has just a tad bit higher ceiling, but I do think that they have similar ceilings. The way I look at this particular selection right now is I think Bryce is going to accumulate more value in the 2023 season. And so if I'm taking them back to back, I would take the guy that I think will become more valuable and maybe get a Stroud plus next year when, you're looking at a low volume offense, you're kind of unsure. The rushing isn't really there for probably either of them this first year. But I do think that people are more in on Bryce. And so I mentioned already, I've leaned into taking either one of these guys, and I have a few Bryce shares. And I think right now, like if you ask me tonight when we're recording this, I think I would take Bryce simply because I can then hopefully flip him for Stroud after year one when I do expect Houston to also get better. I think both of these teams are set up really nicely for the future. I definitely think that the Panthers are more set up to potentially be a winning football team in the near future. So I think they're going to go harder at getting weapons around Bryce. So, but yeah, this goes back to, we've talked about it for months, but I think this is a true toss up. And I think that, go with your preferred guy, go with the guy that you believe in. I know that's, bad advice, but like if you're a CJ Stroud fan and you think that he could be a top 5 quarterback, go with it because I think that either one of these guys is going to be a good pick where you're selecting.
Couldn't just say Bryce, huh? You had to give it. You had to give
All the caveats, man. All of them.
all the caveats there. No, I agree. What do you guys think in the comments? Where are you at with these two guys? Would you take Bryce? Would you take CJ? Or what have you taken? Now in Dynasty, it's all about team building. You're looking at these guys. If one of these guys is your first quarterback off the board, I'd lean Bryce because I think he has a safer floor. And if you're building your roster, I tend to think that. But again, if you take one of these guys at QB1, then you're going to be kind of have that productive struggle that first year. So appreciate you guys. Hit that like and subscribe button. If you like this stuff, find our Patreon. We have a bunch of stuff. People use our rankings, our combined rankings for Devy Dynasty. We've ranked over 150 quarterbacks, 200 running backs, 200 wide receivers, and 150 tight ends. Together for Devy Dynasty. Everything's together for you. $3 a month. Can't beat that out there. So appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys next time.